Pay attention to Catherine Campbell, 36 years old, laughing on a dance floor at the Halifax Ale House in the small hours of September 11th, 2015. She is dancing with a man she met tonight, a drink in her hand, the music loud enough to drown out everything else. She tilts her head back and they kiss. It is the kind of kiss that happens in bars all over the world on any given night. Two people finding each other in the noise, feeling something that seems real enough to follow. She has less than 3 hours left to live. And here's the part that chills investigators to this day. The danger closing in on her is not a stranger lurking in a parking lot. It is not a shadow that has followed her for weeks. It is the man whose arms are around her right now. A former paramedic, a man trained to save lives. The man she is kissing on that dance floor. By the time the sun came up over Halifax, Constable Catherine Campbell was dead. This is a story about how quickly an ordinary night can turn into the last one. And it starts with a woman who protected her community for a living, and who nobody protected in return. Catherine Campbell was, by every account, exactly the kind of person you would want wearing a badge. The people who knew her knew one thing above all. If Catherine was going to be late, Catherine called. If something came up, Catherine let you know. She did not disappear. She did not go quiet. She was the coworker who checked in, the friend who followed through. So when Catherine Campbell did not show up for her shift on the following Monday, the alarm did not take long to sound. It was her own dispatch supervisor, a coworker, and a good friend, who first felt that cold drop in the stomach. Catherine being a no-show was not an inconvenience. It was a warning sign. The supervisor asked the Halifax Regional Police to run a welfare check on Catherine's Dartmouth apartment, just across the harbor. Officers knocked. No answer. They went inside, and what they found was almost worse than a struggle. Because there was no struggle. No overturned furniture, no signs of a break-in, nothing dramatic at all, just a quiet apartment and a terrible absence. Her purse was gone, her phone was gone, the small everyday things a person carries with them were gone, and so was Catherine. Surveillance footage told them she had left her apartment a few days earlier, and then nothing. She walked out into a September night and simply never came back. The last confirmed sighting placed her at home very early on the 10th. After that, the trail went dark. And into that darkness, the news cameras arrived, standing on the very balcony where she had last been seen alive. Listen to how the case first reached the public. The reporter is standing where she stood. That is what makes it so hard to hear.
Brett Ruskin, CBC News, here at the apartment of Truro Police Constable Catherine Campbell. This, in fact, is her apartment balcony. She was last seen here at 6:30 in the morning on September 10th. She had just wrapped up a patrol shift in Truro and commuted back here to her home in Dartmouth, and no one has seen her since.
No one has seen her since. 4 words, delivered flat and factual, and they land like a stone. But somewhere in the city, a small number of people already knew far more than they were saying. And the investigation was about to move faster than anyone expected. To understand what happened to Catherine, you have to rewind. Not to the Monday she was missed, to the night she vanished. Shortly after midnight on September 11th, Catherine left her Dartmouth apartment and climbed into a taxi. Her destination was the Halifax Ale House, a busy downtown bar on the other side of the harbor. She was, by all accounts, in fine spirits. The cab driver who dropped her off would later tell police that she did not seem drunk at all. She seemed fine. She seemed happy. A woman out for an ordinary night. Remember that. She arrived clear-headed and in good form. Keep it in mind for what the defense would one day try to claim. Inside the ale house, Catherine met a man named Christopher Garnier. He was 27 years old, a former paramedic, and, as it happened, a former bouncer at that very bar, a familiar face to the staff. Earlier that same day, Garnier had told a friend working there that he had just broken up with his girlfriend. He had, in fact, been kicked out and was crashing at a buddy's apartment while things cooled down. He was, in the plainest terms, out on the rebound. The two of them hit it off. Witnesses noticed. They were close, affectionate, wrapped up in each other on the dance floor in the way that turns heads in a crowded room. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than 2 adults meeting on a Friday night. It looked normal. It looked harmless. It would be neither. Shortly after 3 in the morning, Catherine and Christopher left the ale house together. They shared a taxi back toward the apartment where he was staying, a place that belonged to a friend named Mitchell, who was out at a different bar that night and would not be home until morning. That detail matters. It means the apartment was empty. It means that for the next several hours, only two people on Earth would know what happened inside those walls. The taxi driver could not hear their conversation. He did not know their names. But he told police he felt something in that car. A tension. A charge in the air he could not explain. They went inside. The door closed. And here the record goes silent, because one of the two people in that apartment would never be able to speak again. What we can reconstruct comes from the physical evidence, from what neighbors saw, and from what Garnier himself would later say. And it is grim. At around 4 in the morning, roughly an hour after Catherine and Christopher were seen entering that apartment, Christopher Garnier was seen again, alone, pulling a large green bin. He was captured on security cameras, but he was also seen by living witnesses, ordinary people up early on a Friday morning, a garbage truck driver, a man walking to work. That man would remember a stranger dragging a green bin that looked heavy, far too heavy, straining with the weight of it. Another witness made eye contact with him and would later describe the man as looking, in his own word, weird. There was something wrong in the way he moved, something wrong in the way he pulled that bin through the quiet downtown streets. None of them knew what they were looking at. None of them knew that a woman who had spent her life running toward danger to protect strangers was inside that heavy green bin, being wheeled through the sleeping city. He dumped it near an overpass, in the brush, out of sight. Nearby, tossed aside, were Catherine's keys. Then he went back to the apartment, lay down, and slept. Think about the ordinary people who brushed up against this without knowing it. A man on his way to earn an honest day's pay, glancing at a stranger straining with a bin. A garbage truck driver, doing his rounds in the pre-dawn quiet. A neighbor who caught the man's eye and felt, in that half-second of contact, that something was off. None of them intervened, because there was nothing obvious to intervene in. A man moving a heavy bin at 4 in the morning is strange, but it is not a crime scene. That is the cold genius of it. The most horrifying act can hide inside the most mundane image, and it would be those very same ordinary witnesses, days later, whose scattered memories would help investigators draw a straight and damning line back to Christopher Garnier. Here is where the case stops being merely tragic and becomes, in the words of the people who followed it, infuriating. Because what Christopher Garnier did next was not the behavior of a man drowning in panic or paralyzed by grief. It was the behavior of a man cleaning up a mess. When his friend Mitchell returned home the next morning, he was surprised to find Christopher having a nap on the couch. That was odd for one simple reason. Mitchell had set Christopher up with a pull-out bed, and now the mattress was gone, missing, vanished. When Mitchell asked what had happened to it, Christopher had an answer ready. He said he had gotten sick, had too much to drink, was ill on the mattress, and so he had thrown it out. "Do not worry about it," he told his friend. "I will buy you a new one." A simple story, a believable story, and a lie. Because that mattress had not been ruined by a hangover, investigators would later conclude it had been used to move a body. Now think about the days that followed. This is the part that stays with people. Over that very weekend, Saturday the 12th and Sunday the 13th, Christopher Garnier did not flee. He did not fall apart. He reconciled with the girlfriend who had thrown him out. He went to his father's birthday party. He acted, by every outward measure, completely normal. He smiled. He made small talk. He carried on with his life. Meanwhile, Catherine Campbell lay in the brush by an overpass, and her family had not yet even been told she was missing. From the outside, everything about Christopher Garnier seemed perfectly well, but underneath that calm surface, a countdown had already begun. Because the witnesses who had seen the man with the heavy green bin were talking, their accounts were reaching the police, and detectives were quietly piecing together a route, from the alehouse, to the cab, to the apartment, to a man dragging a bin through the dark. They had a suspect before they even had a body. By the time an autopsy would tell the full story, the pieces were already snapping into place. Catherine had died of strangulation. She had also suffered a fractured nose and blackened eyes. This was not a peaceful death. This was violence, up close and personal. And within a matter of days, the missing persons case the public had been asked to help with quietly became something far darker. A senior investigator stepped in front of the cameras to say the words every family dreads. Listen closely. He is careful. He is measured, but he is telling the city that hope is running out.
Good morning. I'd like to make an opening statement, and then I'll take some questions. I'm Superintendent Jim Parr. I'm the officer in charge of the Integrated Criminal Investigation Division. I'm here today to speak about the death of Catherine Campbell, which is being treated as a homicide. This file evolved very quickly to the point that we believed yesterday afternoon that it would not have a positive outcome.
A homicide. That single word ended every hopeful rumor in an instant, and it turned the full weight of a police service onto the man who had been the last person to see Catherine Campbell alive. Catherine's body was found on September 15th in Halifax, just across the bridge from Dartmouth. She was discovered near an overpass, tucked beneath a large wooden box. In a garbage bin close by, police recovered her keys, and just over an hour after her body was found, officers moved on their suspect. Christopher Garnier was arrested while driving his car, and here is the detail that made investigators' blood run cold. He was not driving away from where Catherine's body lay. He was driving toward it. When they searched his vehicle, they understood why. Inside the car, they found a tarp, rope, a blanket, a 5-liter gas can, half full, and a backpack that read like the kit of a man preparing to disappear or to erase something. It held sandals, a hoodie, several t-shirts, pants, 6 pairs of underwear, toiletries, his passport, a deck of cards, and 2 boxes of a medication used to treat depression. There are, as one commentator dryly put it, a lot of things you might do with that collection of items, but 2 of them stand out: burn a body and run. Investigators believed Garnier was returning to Catherine's remains to destroy the evidence. He had, they would argue, come back for her. Then police went to the apartment where it had all happened, and the walls began to talk. Blood was found on the floor of the den, on the back of the television, on an Xbox that someone had wiped clean, on the handle of a cupboard, the one that held the cleaning supplies. Every sample matched Catherine Campbell. Someone had tried to scrub that apartment. But blood is stubborn. It seeps into the seams of a life and refuses to leave. It hides on the back of a television, in the joints of a game console, on the very handle of the cupboard where the cleaning supplies were kept, a fingerprint of panic left behind by a man reaching for the tools to erase what he had done. Every place a person touches while cleaning up a killing is a place that can betray them, and in that apartment, they all did. There is a particular cruelty in that Xbox, wiped clean. It tells you this was not a moment of pure, blind panic and nothing more. Someone had the presence of mind, in the hours after a woman died, to wipe down surfaces, to try to think it through, to consider what a stranger's eye might notice. That is not the frenzy of an accident. That is the labor of a cover-up. There was more. On a computer, detectives found searches for something very specific: memory loss related to alcohol, memory loss caused by antidepressants. Someone had gone looking for a reason not to remember, or for a story that could explain why he could not. And then came the interrogation. It lasted 9.5 hours. 9.5 hours of an investigator sitting across from a former paramedic, pushing, circling, refusing to look away. It is one of the most extraordinary pieces of tape in modern Canadian true crime, and it begins with a question that cuts straight to the heart of everything. Here is how it opened. Notice how carefully he separates the 2 possibilities.
You don't remember, or you don't want to remember?
I don't remember.
What do you remember? After she paid for the cab, what do you remember?
I don't remember. 2 words that would become the spine of his entire defense. But the detective was not buying it, and he was not going anywhere, because the tape was about to get much closer to the truth. For hours, the investigator built the scene brick by brick, using what the evidence had already told him. At one point, he walks Garnier through the apartment as if it is a stage, placing Catherine on the bed, placing Christopher standing over her. It is the closest anyone will ever get to seeing inside those missing hours, and it is agonizing to hear. Steady yourself for this one. This is the moment the interrogator forces him to look directly at what he did.
I remember her being on the bed, or the pillow, and she was bleeding.
This is where the sofa would be. This is the end of the bed, and she's diagonal like this on the bed, right? Pretend this is her head. Okay? And you're standing there, and you punch her 2 or 3 times, right? And she's still down on her back, right? Chris, you're angry. You're really angry. You're angry enough. Like I said earlier, you don't go around punching women. You've never punched Brittany, ever. There's no history of you going around punching women randomly. What did she say to you?
I don't know.
You're stressed out. Things are messed up where your girlfriend left you. Shit is piling up like it's all over the place. You snap, punch her, and then what happens?
My hands are on her neck.
Yes.
Then what happens? The question hangs there, and the silence that follows it is heavier than any answer. Catherine was not fighting him. She was down, and the man who had been trained to protect life kept swinging. But the interrogator was not finished, because there was still the matter of what came after she stopped moving. The detective pressed forward, into the darkest territory of all, the disposal. He needed to know whether Catherine had still been alive when she was placed into that bin, and the way Garnier answers is somehow both an admission and an evasion at the same time. Listen to how he tries to soften it, even now.
Tell me that she wasn't still alive when she was put in that dump, that compost bin. Was she still alive when she was put in that compost bin?
No.
She didn't suffer in there? She didn't suffer when you threw her down over that bank? She was dead? How do you know she was dead?
She didn't suffer. He offers it almost as reassurance, as though there is comfort to be found in the corner of such a nightmare. But I think she is not knowledge. It is a hope. And the interrogator seizes on exactly that, because Garnier of all people should have been certain. This is where his own training is turned against him. He was a paramedic. He had checked for signs of life countless times. So, the detective asks the only question that matters. Hear how the professional in him answers, even in the middle of the worst moment of his life.
You're a paramedic. How do you know that she was not alive?
She wasn't breathing.
Okay, how do you know she didn't suffer? Like, how did it end? Did she end? Was it over quick? Is what I'm saying.
I think so.
She wasn't breathing. The man who once rushed to strangers to keep them breathing had, this time, been the reason one stopped. And still, the tape pushed on, toward the plan, toward the tarp and the gas can in the car, toward the question of what Christopher Garnier intended to do next. Because remember the items in his vehicle, the tarp, the gas, the half-full can. The detective wanted him to say out loud what those things were for, and where he had been headed when they arrested him. This next exchange is chilling in its restraint. He does not deny it. He simply admits he had thought about it.
You were going to go and do something with her body.
I don't know what I was going to do.
Okay, well, the stuff you had in your car, what was that for?
Well, I had my bag because I wasn't sure if I was going to leave or not.
Right? What else?
But the tarp and gas, they could have been for one or two things.
Which were what? That's what I'm saying, Chris. What were those things for? What did you have those for? You know what you had them for. You were going back down there to get her.
I thought about it.
Yes, you were.
I thought about it, yes. He was going back for her, not to confess, not to bring her home to her family, to finish erasing her. And that leads to the single most damning idea in the entire case, the one the interrogator finally throws down on the table like a verdict of its own. Because the horror was never only in what happened that night, it was in what happened after, the normal weekend, the girlfriend, the birthday party, a man walking through his ordinary life with a secret buried in the brush. This is the moral center of the whole tape. Let it land.
How can somebody, like, if I ran over a dog, I'd feel bad. How can somebody do something like this and then all weekend you act normal, have sex with your girlfriend, go to your father's birthday party?
If I ran over a dog, I'd feel bad. That is a police officer, a veteran of hard rooms, unable to reconcile the man in front of him with the calm weekend that man had lived. And that question, how can somebody, would haunt this case all the way to the courtroom. Because Christopher Garnier had an answer coming. And it was one that would enrage an entire country. At some point during his time with police, Christopher Garnier wrote a letter. It was later read aloud in court, and on its surface, it sounds like remorse. I don't know where to start, it began. I only hope this will give you some closure. I never wanted this to happen. I've always been a caring person, but this is my darkest moment. I don't expect you to forgive me for what happened, so I won't ask for your forgiveness. I do need you to know that I am so sorry this happened. If I could give my own life to get hers back, I would. I will carry this with me for the rest of my life. Read in isolation, it is the letter of a broken man. But hold it up against the tarp, the gas can, the scrubbed Xbox, the lie about the mattress, and the weekend spent acting normal, and it begins to feel like something else entirely. A performance of sorrow from a man who had already shown how well he could perform. Christopher Garnier was charged with second-degree murder and with interfering with or committing an indignity to human remains. He pled not guilty, and then, remarkably, he was released. After the confession, after the letter, a judge granted him bail of $100,000 and placed him under house arrest. He would eventually be arrested again after breaching the terms of that house arrest. But for a time, the man at the center of this case walked free. His trial began in November 2017, more than 2 years after Catherine Campbell died. And this is where the case turns from tragedy to fury. Because at trial, Christopher Garnier changed his tune. That confession, that letter, all those hours of tape, it was all, he now claimed, just him telling the police what they wanted to hear. 2 years removed from the room, 2 years removed from the blood, he wanted the jury to believe the man on that tape had been putting on an act. Then came the defense theory itself, and it was, in the eyes of many who watched, indefensible. They argued that Catherine had asked for it, that the encounter had been consensual rough sex, that she had asked to be choked, and that her death had been a terrible accident. This from a woman who arrived at the bar, clear-headed and in good spirits, who had a fractured nose and 2 blackened eyes, injuries that do not arrive by accident. The defense even suggested that because Catherine was a trained police officer, she surely could have fought back if she had truly been attacked, as if her strength and her training were somehow evidence against her, rather than a reminder of exactly who the world lost. It was, in plain terms, blaming the victim for her own murder, and it asked a grieving family to sit in a courtroom and hear the woman they loved painted as the author of her own death. There was one more layer, and it may be the layer that outraged Canada most of all. The defense presented evidence that Christopher Garnier had developed post-traumatic stress disorder, not from combat, not from years of trauma as a first responder, from the killing itself. His own father wrote to the judge describing his son's night terrors, his flashbacks, his difficulty sleeping, his hypervigilance. The man who took Catherine Campbell's life was now being presented as a victim of the trauma of having taken it. The jury did not agree. On both counts, second-degree murder and indignity to human remains, they found Christopher Garnier guilty. The reaction in that courtroom was raw, and it broke across both sides of the aisle at once. Picture it, 2 families, 2 kinds of tears, in a single silent room.
Well, Aaron, as you can probably imagine, the reaction inside the courtroom was extremely emotional on both sides. Members of Catherine Campbell's family were celebrating, they were crying, they were very emotional about the verdict. Members of Christopher Garnier's family, who have been here through the trial as well, also a lot of tears on that side, in particular from his girlfriend, Brittany Francis, who's been here holding his hand every single day as he's come in and out of court. She broke down into tears. I saw him as he was whisked back into court to take a long look at her as he sat down. It's obviously a very emotional day for 2 families here in Halifax with his sentencing.
He took a long look at her as he sat down, a convicted killer, turning to the woman who had held his hand through the trial, while across the room another family wept for the woman who would never come home. It is a portrait of grief and denial in a single frame, and to understand the full weight of that verdict, you have to hear, plainly and without euphemism, exactly what he was convicted of doing. This is the reporting stripped bare, no dramatics, just the facts the court accepted.
The Crown alleges that he and Catherine Campbell got home to that apartment. They were in for a very short time before he punched her and then strangled her until he could hear her last breaths. And then he used a mattress to drag her body outside. He put the body into that green bin, wheeled it through downtown Halifax, dumped it in some bushes. Then he dumped the green bin in another location. He came back to the apartment and got rid of a number of pieces of evidence, some of which was never even found in this case, including the mattress. And then he went to sleep.
Until he could hear her last breaths. That is the reality behind the polite courtroom word, homicide. And even with a guilty verdict, even with a life sentence handed down, this case still had one final insult waiting for the public. Christopher Garnier was sentenced to life in prison, with parole eligibility set at 13.5 years. Now, eligibility is not release. Being eligible for parole after 13 and a half years does not mean he walks out after 13 and a half years. He could serve far, far longer. Many believe he will. But the sentence was not the end of the story, because a question began circulating in Canada that made people genuinely angry. Christopher Garnier had PTSD, the defense said. He needed treatment, and someone had to pay for it. That someone turned out to be Veterans Affairs Canada, the federal department responsible for the pensions, benefits, and services owed to the nation's war veterans, was funding the treatment of a convicted murderer. Christopher Garnier had never served a single day in the armed forces, but his father had, and under the rules as they stood, that connection was enough to entitle him to benefits. A convicted killer, receiving care meant for those who served their country, for trauma he suffered while committing the very crime that put him in prison. The outcry was immediate and national. A motion was eventually raised to strip those benefits away, and in a result that stunned many, that motion was defeated. Whether lawmakers feared setting a precedent or simply lost the vote, the outcome was the same. The benefits remained. In December 2019, Christopher Garnier appealed his conviction, keeping the case alive and forcing Catherine's family to relive it once more. And through all of it, one final piece of tape distilled the entire national frustration into a few sentences. A reporter laying out the plain arithmetic of the case.
Christopher Garnier from Halifax is serving a life sentence for killing off-duty police officer Catherine Campbell back in 2015. At trial, an expert for his defense testified Garnier developed post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the murder.
Post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the murder. Read that again slowly, and you understand why this case still makes people furious years later. The trauma of the killer weighed in the same room as the death of the killed. So what are we left with? When the appeals are filed and the cameras move on, we are left with Catherine Campbell, not the headline, not the case file, the woman, 36 years old, a constable who gave 6 years to the Truro Police Service, a volunteer firefighter who ran toward the fires, other people fled, a coworker so dependable that her simply not showing up for work was enough to trigger a search. That is the truest measure of a person, that her absence was loud precisely because her presence had always been so reliable. She went out on an ordinary night, in good spirits, doing nothing more dangerous than living her life. And she crossed paths with a man who, on paper, should have been the safest person in the room. A paramedic, a protector, the last man you would expect to be a threat. That is the quiet, uncomfortable truth at the center of this story, and it is why it lingers. The danger was not the stranger in the shadows we are all taught to watch for. The danger was the man beside her, the one who smiled, the one who shared her cab, the one who, for one weekend, walked calmly through his own life, with her memory buried in the brush. There is a bitter irony that a policing community feels most sharply of all. Catherine Campbell wore the uniform. She knew, better than almost anyone, how a night out could turn, how quickly a situation could slide from ordinary into dangerous. She had been trained to read a room, to sense trouble, to protect, and still it found her, not in some high-risk confrontation on duty, but in a friend's borrowed apartment, at the hands of a man no reasonable person would have flagged as a threat. If it could happen to a trained constable and firefighter, it forces an uncomfortable question onto the rest of us. How do you protect yourself from the danger that does not look like danger at all? The answer, honestly, is that you cannot always. And that is not a reason to live in fear. It is a reason to take seriously the instincts that so many people in this story quietly felt and set aside. The cab driver who sensed tension in the back seat, the witness who thought the man with the bin looked wrong, the coworker who knew, immediately, that Catherine not calling meant something was badly amiss. In the end, it was that last instinct, a friend refusing to explain away a silence, that set everything in motion. Catherine Campbell spent her career standing between ordinary people and harm. She deserved someone to stand between her and it too. She never got the chance. Remember her name, not his. Catherine Campbell. She protected her community to the very end, and in the telling of what was done to her, the least we can do is refuse to let her be the footnote in the story of the man who took her. She was the reliable one. She was the one who always called. And on one September night, for the first time, no one answered for her.